This is the first time I'm getting to see you. Wonderful to see you.
Yeah, I think so. Good to see you.
Yeah. All right. I think we have several people online and maybe a few more might join. But I want to make sure that we have enough time for Jeannine to actually speak and share all her amazing experiences with us today. So welcome everyone. Welcome Jeannine. Thank you so much for taking the time today and being here. We're almost a year old now. Well, not almost. We actually did finish 1 year. So coming to Ayurveda is 1 year old. And we've had, amazing 8 speakers as part of the Women in Ayurveda series. You're our 9th speaker today. This is very special. And I just want to thank you for being here. And I'll hand over to you shortly. I'll just share a few pointers for those of you who may be new to our webinars. That if you have any questions, any comments that you want to share, please feel free to put them in the chat window. We'll definitely keep it interactive, and Jeannine can talk more about when she may like to take questions, like as she goes along or in the end. But if you have questions, put them in the chat window, and we'll definitely take them towards the end. So without much further ado, I'll hand over to you, Jeannine. And I'll also put your video on Spotlight and probably switch off everyone else's video so that we can focus on listening to you. Thank you so much, Jeannine.
Thank you, Shruti. It's an honor to be here, and I look forward.
I'm going to mute everyone, and if you guys can mute yourselves or switch off your video, that would be great. Then we can focus on Jeannine's audio and video.
Okay, thank you, Shruti. It's an honor to be here and to have been chosen to speak in your Women of Ayurveda series. So I am Jeannine Rashidi, and the name of my practice is Goodbye Tension, which I started about 17 years ago. It's a health and wellness clinic designed to relieve tension physically, mentally, emotionally, and digestively. I'm also a student at Kerala Ayurveda Academy in the Ayurvedic Doctor Training Program. I did my AWC and my AWP there and their specialty programs. I am a mother, a wife, and a grandmother to 3 so far. My hobbies are photography, hiking in nature, storytelling, and gnomes. So as I begin to share my story, as you know, post-traumatic stress disorder is about trauma. And when we share our story, we change lives. But because this is a story of trauma, I want to make sure not to traumatize others, which I learned along the way that my story can be traumatizing. So I'm going to keep it very high level. If you have any questions or concerns, I'm pretty much an open book. But if I feel the question that you're asking at the end of this presentation might not be appropriate for the group, then I will be happy to meet with you offline and we can discuss further. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. From post-traumatic stress disorder to Ayurvedic doctor and training. This is all about healing the relationship with myself and how I came to be sitting in front of you today, as well as the 17 years of practice now where everything that I've learned from my life experience and all the different trainings that I've had to now be able to guide others through any of their traumas or difficulties in life, along with using the Ayurvedic education that I have. So first we need to understand what is post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is the disorder in which a person has difficulty recovering after experiencing or witnessing a terrifying event, or in my case, many events. This condition can last months or years, and it brings triggers that can bring back memories of the trauma accompanied by intense emotional and physical reactions. So from an Ayurvedic perspective, this is undigestible experiences, also known as ama. So the first 25 years of my life, there was ongoing psychological, sexual, emotional, and physical abuse. And here's a bit of a high-level timeline. So I was born into addiction and violence. My parents, they were very imbalanced. May they be blessed. And I was fortunate enough that I loved learning. And many of my teachers through school, they were suspicious of what was, happening at home. And I feel that my teachers took me under their wing and gave me the support, the encouragement to keep learning. And they also taught me how to ask for help with, scholarships that helped me do extracurricular activities so that I was having less time at home, which I was very grateful for. But by the time I reached the 10th grade, I was started to question, where is the class that teaches me how to deal with what's going on at home? Well, there isn't such a class. There isn't one to this day that I know of, and my hope is that that will change someday. And even though I was a straight A student, I had my hopes set on college, wanting to be in a profession that would help others, mainly because I was also in search of help, and I didn't want others to experience what I had. The thought of waiting until I finished high school seemed like an eternity. And from my perspective at the time, anything was going to be better than staying at home. So I chose to run away from home at 15. And I learned how to live homeless. Now I learned some really amazing survival skills. Hopefully I don't have to use them ever again. But with those skills, there was also a good amount of trauma that came from that experience. So here I am at 15, and now I've met someone and I've entered into a relationship. I'm unaware at this point that I've entered into the same type of abuse that I had come from. So what happens is, if you don't heal from the trauma that you've had as a child, unconsciously and subconsciously and statistically, you are more likely to fall right into that same cycle, or you all could become like the abuser. Now, I left home with the intention of getting away from that type of life. My intention was not to enter into the same type of situation, but I hadn't healed those issues yet. And so that's what happened. And I became a mother at 16, again at 20. And then I ended up marrying this same man by the time I was 17. And you may be wondering, why on earth would I do that? Well, I'm still a child at this point. And I was under the, I call it more of a fantasy syndrome, that marriage will fix everything. If I marry, he will somehow no longer be an addict. He will no longer be abusive. We're going to live happily ever after, and he will provide for his family, and all will be well. But that was not the case. And so history was repeating itself. And then one day it became clear that history now had repeated itself with my daughters. And this broke my heart because I left home with the intention of leaving that sort of environment, only to end up in the same cycle for another 10 years. And there were many attempts to try to leave this relationship, and they were unsuccessful. And of course, by the time he figured out that I had made those attempts, it became more difficult each time. But eventually, by the time my children were 4 and 8, I was 25. We were able to figure out how to get out of that situation. And my sole purpose in life became to change the cycle. I already was a statistic. I fell into the same cycle. The same crimes had happened now towards my children. And all I could think of was, I don't want them to end up with in a relationship that's abusive. I certainly don't want them to be teen moms. And I really would like them to finish their high school education so that they have choices and options. So this is what that looked like for me once I left. I had hypertension. I was obese at 240 pounds, severe migraines, insomnia, irregular periods, psychologically, dealing with intense flashbacks, intense fear, unwanted thoughts, hypervigilance, suspiciousness. I could not trust anyone. And it makes sense. My first initiation with the feminine is my mother, and that was a violating experience. My first initiation with male is father, and that was also a violating experience. And then my first deep relationship, also a violating experience. So there was no trust. I didn't know how to trust. There were nightmares and night terrors, severe anxiety, depression. I had memory issues. When you have flashback, you lose chunks of time. But I also noticed I had difficulty with retaining information. And I was also a smoker. What we feel, think, and experience, it circulates through the entire body. I had fear, anger, trauma, sadness, etc. And how I was relating with those feelings, those thoughts, and all of those impressions of trauma, I was not able to digest all of those experiences. And when digestion is slow and ama is there, it creates disease. And that's why I had all of those symptoms in the previous slide. Now, when we're able to digest experiences, we are more healthy. And this is what that looked like at 25. Obviously, I needed to create a different relationship with myself. My relating psychologically, sexually, emotionally, and physically all needed some sort of upgrade. So how was I going to create a relationship with myself when all of my experiences of relationship were so dysfunctional? And now I'm going to talk about inner child a little bit, but this picture came through my inner child, and I believe it says it all. So in order to create a relationship with ourselves, we have to understand what is relationship. And it's the way in which two or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, or the state of being connected. So in order to do this, I needed to be able to see myself as I was, not as I wanted to be. I needed to start observing the conditioning that I had. I also had to start becoming aware of my thoughts and my feelings, as well as more self-love. And the inner talk needed a lot of help and a lot of love. I needed courage to see myself where I was, and the courage to change. The interesting thing about change, for me anyway, was the feeling is very close to fear and excitement. And if you've ever been in a situation where you kind of feel nervous or scared or excited, it's a fine line. You only know which side you're on once you actually get there. You're either in fear or excitement. Well, this feeling that would come up, that was actually a triggering feeling because it reminded me of the feeling I had growing up. So here I am having a triggering feeling with the intention and goal that I want to change, but every time I get to the word change, I get triggered. So I needed commitment to learn to love myself first. How on earth was I going to attract the right partner, be a good mother, a good grandmother, if I didn't know how to love myself first? So how do we get to know others in relationship? We date them. So I needed to date myself. What I discovered while dating myself was that I had some amazing skills that I learned from that first 25 years. I learned how to create a nice solid wall around my heart so that I couldn't be hurt. Basically, I was holding my own feelings hostage. I felt that crying was a weakness. The maze I had created in my mind so that I could not be psychologically violated anymore was pretty intricate. And all of these skills, they defined me. I identified with them, and now here I was coming into my present situation, and all of those skills were actually harmful. Any relationship that I created or got into, they only knew a part of me. And my self-preservation mechanism was, if each person only knows a part of me, nobody knows the whole. And therefore, the whole of me cannot be compromised anymore. So I basically had to unlearn what I had learned. And this terrified me because it defined who I was. Who was I going to be if I didn't have all of these configurations I had created around my heart and my mind? Well, I'll tell you, you don't actually lose those skills. Once you unlearn them, they no longer have control of you. And should I ever need to use them, they're always right there, but I have the choice to use them. So I brought all of those skills into the present and realized I needed to unlearn those skills so that I could have a healthier relationship, not only with myself, but with others. I had to change how I was relating with my story. And a lot of work that I do with my clients has to do with changing how they're relating with whatever the story is in whatever circumstance. So how do we do that? This is where I learned inner child work. And what I learned was that if you can imagine that you're hearing your own story from the innocence of a child, how would you respond so that the child felt seen, heard, comforted in a way that allows for growth and independence? When I do this work with others now, sometimes it's very easy for people to connect there, and sometimes not so much. When I first started, it was very challenging for me because every time I saw an innocent child, it just reminded me of the innocence that was lost for myself. So I had to work with practitioners who could help me connect with my inner child, whom I had disconnected with as a self-preservation mechanism to get through trauma. What I learned were the gunas, basically. I had no idea about Ayurveda yet. There was darkness, and darkness needed light. There was ignorance. I needed more wisdom. And I had a lot of judgment. I needed more self-love. I also needed to start looking at each moment as an opportunity for growth. And what I mean by this is, for example, when my clients or yogis come in, they're coming to me for guidance so that they can grow. What they don't realize, although I've told some, is that they are actually helping me grow. Each yogi, each client is an opportunity for my growth. Should they say something or bring up something that points out an area that I need to grow, whether I need to heal myself in some way so that I can guide them more appropriately. Maybe I need to research more herbs or formulations or some prapti. They are also teaching me. But what about when we're in a situation where we're in an adversarial situation with somebody and we want to point the finger and accuse them of something? And this is going to sound totally cliche, but yes, there are three fingers pointing back at you and they're saying, I'm your teacher, question your thoughts, and face everything and rise. And so that's what I learned. My triggers were my teachers. But the only way I could start processing that was to start questioning my thoughts and my beliefs. This is where I used the work of Byron Katie. And she has three very powerful questions. Whatever the question or whatever the belief or the thought, you ask yourself, is it true? And if there's a quick, immediate response, that's usually the ego. And I believe that's why she asks the second question, which is, how do you know for certain it's true? So in my case, I didn't trust anyone. In fact, my belief was that it was only a matter of time before each person showed their true colors, which was some sort of ill intent in my direction. And while that thought and that belief helped in that first 25-year span, that was actually very harmful to try and create a more functional and healthy life. So I had to question that. And no, it wasn't true. I wasn't certain it was true. It was true in the past, but I had no concrete evidence to support the thought or the belief that I had. And then this third question, so powerful. Who would I be without this thought? And the possibilities were endless. But again, here came excitement and nervousness, because what if who I was or who I become from dropping that thought or belief does not support my current life? And I was afraid of that. Well, in order to change, I had to be willing to accept that maybe it will be that way, maybe it won't. I don't know. So I had to face everything and rise. So you see the picture here of this little scaredy cat, and this reminds me of my 2.5-year-old grandson. And he comes over and he sees one of our cats and he runs in the opposite direction towards me, away from the cat, and he says, I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid. And you can see this child is afraid, but he has figured out how to self-regulate and tell himself that he's not afraid. So as grandma, I want to help him face that. And so I ask him, Xavier, what are you not afraid of? And he says, I'm not afraid of the kitty. It's okay. So then we turn around and we look at the kitty. I pet the kitty. I hold the kitty so that he can see no harm is coming to me, so that he can start facing the fear that he has. So more of the timeline. I went in search of therapy immediately after leaving that abusive relationship. And what I discovered as I was sharing the details of my story with traditional psychologists was that I was actually traumatizing them. I should not have had to worry about this, but this is how it happened. And so I would continually get referred out until eventually referred to psychiatry, where I was prescribed Zoloft and Prozac, which I tried. I was open to all of it. But what I couldn't get an answer from the psychiatrist was, well, how do I heal this if the people I'm talking to can't handle what they're hearing? So I tried the Zoloft, I tried the Prozac. It just made me numb. And I wanted to feel. I wanted to get to the core of my issues. So at this time, I'm also, in massage school, which was a logical decision. Once I left that relationship, I wanted to create a life that would support me being able to create my own hours, to take my children to school, pick them up. And it come to find out I was actually really good at it. I'd never even had a massage before I signed up for it. I created my own practice, Good by Tension, while searching for all of the alternative types of therapies that would help me heal my trauma. And the ones that I felt worked, I naturally wanted to learn how to do it so that I could be more self-responsible and heal myself. And so I either got trained or certified in those modalities and naturally just brought it into my practice. So I was always continually learning, continually healing. My children were in therapy as well, obviously, and all of the therapists knew what the goal was: to change the cycle of dysfunction. During that process, I lost 90 pounds naturally. The last 40 that I had lost, I did it very intensely, working with a trainer, lost it over a 3-month span. And I didn't realize that I had completely depleted myself. So I was on one end of the spectrum when I began, and now here I was completely on the other end. And this is eventually actually what brought me to Ayurveda. Well, before I knew about Ayurveda, I was introduced to yoga and meditation. I was trying to heal my own anxiety without medication. And I was having panic attacks, and someone introduced me to Bikram yoga, and I realized that I always got anxiety or a panic attack while in the yoga class. I mean, it's hot, you can barely breathe, but I decided to use it as a teaching mechanism for myself, and I learned mind over matter, how to breathe, how to calm myself down. I would later learn that that type of yoga was actually exacerbating the problem, but I had no idea yet. So like I said, I learned meditation, I learned Tai Chi, so all of this was helping me come more into a balanced state. And then I finally attracted the right partner. And I met my husband, and he adopted both of my girls at 12 and 16. And that was a beautiful process because they got new birth certificates where it shows that he's their father. And that started helping them heal the father relationship. He also brought his 2 children from his previous relationship. And at the time they were 3 and 5. A little while later, I met Dr. J because I had a medical issue that came up, and Western medicine couldn't figure it out. In fact, the diagnosis that they gave me was she had a spell. And I thought to myself, maybe I need to find a witch doctor if I had a spell. I'm only partly joking about, seeking out a witch doctor. But through various channels, I found out about Ayurveda. My first experience was that my husband had gifted me a book on yoga and Ayurveda from David Frawley. So I had that introduction, and we had just moved when all of this happened. And so I did a search, and come to find out, Kerala was 10 minutes from my house at the time. And so I naturally made an appointment. So if you've ever had an appointment with Dr. J, it's amazing because you sit there, you're pouring out your heart on everything that's going on. And then towards the end, he says, I have a plan. And he's very chill about it. And I've been apprenticing with Dr. J now since 2016. And it never fails. Each yogi has the same response. They take a deep breath, and there's this sigh of, finally, somebody can give me an answer. And that was my experience. So I wanted to know more. And I signed up for AWC with the intention of healing myself. Eventually went on to AWP. I brought these into my practice. That was not the intention when I started, although looking back, of course, I brought them in. That's just what I do. I get excited about things, especially when they work. I talk with people, then people get interested, and naturally, it just all fuses together. In the meantime, daughters did not get pregnant. Great. I achieved number 1 of my goal. The second one was finish high school. They did that. And then the third one was that they would meet partners that were healthier than the one that they initially grew up with and the one that I had first married. And that happened. And then I became a grandmother. And I have to tell you, the most recent experience, both of my daughters gave birth 5 hours apart on July 20th and July 21st. I was physically there with one in labor and delivery through the whole process, and thanks to technology, I was able to be on FaceTime with the other one as she was going through her process. And to recognize where I had come from to that point, that here comes another generation, and that generation is being born into a much healthier situation. And I'm just keeping it real with you. In Ayurveda, we learn not to hold back our emotions, so I'm just keeping it real, and I like to be authentic. This was everything I had worked towards. And so now we have these beautiful, beautiful children, grandchildren, and they're going to start growing up in a better situation than what their mothers did and what their grandmother did. And eventually, I started my Ayurvedic doctor training program, which I'm currently in. So what I did here was I took the negative experiences, which seemed to be a minus, but when you add awareness, it becomes a plus. That emotional baggage, I figured out how to turn it into an unusually large bag of experiences and tools. And here's what Ayurveda taught me. I learned about food, water, breath, lifestyle, and perception. And I know that a lot of you here are already in Ayurveda. I'm not going to go too deep. I just want to give high level for those that are not as familiar. So I learned that I needed to eat wholesome food. Now, mind you, I had completely depleted myself by the time I came to Ayurveda. And I was one of those eat all protein, no carb types of people. So I needed to learn how to eat cooked, organic food and eating at the proper time, making sure that I wasn't eating before the previous meal was digested. Making sure that I ate at the right time, roughly before 7:30, around 12:30 to 1:30, and then before 7:30 in the evening. Hydration, super important. Our body is made up mostly of water. I was actually drinking too much water, so 64 ounces, and then I learned about not drinking cold water because we have a digestive fire, and the quickest way to put out your fire or your metabolism is to drink cold water or eat lots of cold items. Breath. This one is a godsend, and some of you that are on this call might have joined my breath classes before, but wherever the breath goes, the mind follows. And if I'm triggered, I know because I'm holding my breath. And usually the signal that I get is that all of a sudden I have to take a deep breath. That means my breath is not being regulated. So I learned about deep diaphragmatic breathing, alternate nostril breathing. I learned about which breaths were okay for my Vikriti and not, Vikriti meaning imbalance. And then I learned about the consistency of needing a breath practice to keep my mind in balance. And then my lifestyle. Well, at the time, I was going to bed roughly around 2, 3 a.m. That doesn't help the mind in any way, shape, or form. In fact, the sleep is mind at rest, and the digestive hours for the mind are from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Well, I was missing those. So I had to get my sleep in order. And then alone time. I'm trying to create a relationship with myself. If I don't check in with myself, how am I going to have a good relationship with with myself. And this is a concept that I also teach to my clients, and it seems like a foreign one for many, but I highly recommend that there are chunks of time, not when you're working out, but where you can truly just check in with yourself. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? To help you digest your experiences of your day. And then routine, understanding, when to sleep, when to eat, etc. And then the most important in this case, perception. And for those of you who are guiding others, and because of also what's happening in our world today, this is a huge piece. Everyone is needing more support in perception. Our perception, we perceive things through our senses, what we see, what we hear, smell, taste, touch, feel, etc. Too much stimulation of the senses is too much, and not enough is not enough. Following the medium path, which is what Ayurveda is all about, helps you maintain balance. But you have to be aware of your senses. You have to be aware of those stimulating factors or understimulating factors in order to change. This is one of my most favorite verses out of Charaka. Hridaye Chetanasthanam, which means the seat of consciousness resides in the heart. Well, what I hear when I read this is more heart awareness. The mind, from an Ayurvedic perspective, resides in the heart, so more heart-mind awareness. And so I developed, with the Ayurvedic knowledge and all of my experiences, heart-mind integration. And what that looks like, and this is what I offer to my clients now, it's a 5-step process. First, we explore. Then we discover through that exploration. Then healing needs to happen. Integration needs to happen. And that's what's happening here with these bees. This bee has just healed an aspect. And that aspect that was disconnected is now going to come into integration, and he's going to be more whole. And then relating with the new you, and relating with others as the new you. So heart-mind integration, it's useful in when you're stuck in life, learning to live in the present moment, manifesting, conflict resolution, physical and emotional healing, relieving anxiety, depression, all forms of stress, and any type of trauma. So the first step, explore. Usually I will take my client through a guided breathing practice, something that will help them go inward. So closing their eyes, connecting with their breath, and connecting with their body so that they're not in their head or out of body. And then we start the exploration process. And I never know what this is going to look like, which makes it really fun. It could be that maybe I do a guided meditation using a specific place in nature. Maybe we just have a conversation and it's noticing which words are continually being said by my client and pointing it out. Maybe as they're in that meditative state, I throw out words just to try to trigger a moment or a memory, and then we try to get to the earliest memory, because if we can heal the earliest memory, most of the time you don't have to go through all that trauma. You heal that one and then it changes your timeline. So as we're exploring through that process, we're on a discovery mission. What are we discovering in that? And this is where you have to be really open. And not everyone likes what they find, but the only way for change is to see it. You have to face it. So what is showing up without judgment? Seeing it for what it is, and then just being with what is. Only then can healing happen. So then we begin the healing process of coming back into a connection So in my case, I had all of these disconnected parts of me that were stuck in time loops. And whenever I got triggered, some aspect of me would start reliving that story, and it was just a continuation. So when you learn how to recognize that and then get in touch with that, I had to basically face all the different versions of my inner child, and be able to look at her and hear her and see her, and then give her what she needed. So this is where I learned I had to be my own mother, and I had to be my own father. I also had to be my own husband. And that's what I did. I gave my inner child that mother love that I wanted. I gave my inner child that father love appropriately that I wanted. And I also was a good husband to the inner child as she grew older. There was understanding there was love. And through that, now integration can start happening because she's no longer stuck in those time loops. So I now had to accept this new version of me. And after a session, I usually will tell my clients, welcome so-and-so, version 2.0 or so on, just so there's a connection with the fact that who you were when you first started the process is not who you are now. You are now upgraded. Well, now you have to get to know that part of you. That's now becoming integrated, and you don't know who you are yet. You're getting to know yourself. You're relating with yourself differently. So you have to date yourself, and you have to be open that the new upgraded version of you is going to be different. That also means that others around you may have a hard time, because as you change, naturally, the circles around you, if they don't change and upgrade, you will outgrow them. And in my practice, when I'm talking with others, I call it weeding your garden. We all have our own gardens, and we're all, different flowers and plants in the garden. Well, some plants need to be separated from other flowers. And at some point you might have to weed your garden. Not that there's anything wrong with the plants or flowers that you're removing from your garden. It's just there needs to be more space for growth. This journey, it begins with you. When you are healthy and balanced, your relationships, they become healthy and balanced. When your relationships are healthy and balanced, communities become healthy and balanced. And when communities are healthy and balanced, the world becomes healthy and balanced. And I think we can all agree that this is definitely needed, but we have to start with ourselves first. So I've included my contact information here should you have any questions, concerns, if you'd like to work with me. So feel free to write this down, and I hope that you found this inspirational. And if Shruti's okay, I'm open to answering any questions or concerns that anyone might have.
Thank you so much, Jeannine. That was such an inspiring talk. Really moving to hear your story and how you actually used, these experiences, challenging experiences, to develop this. I really liked how you put, you turned your baggage into an oversized bag of tools and experiences. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'd love to open up for thoughts, comments, questions. If people want to put them in the chat, or even if you would like to, maybe raise your hand, and we can have you speak with your video and audio to the group, whatever you prefer. Let me read out some of the comments that are being shared here. Maya, I think this was from a little while back, but Maya was saying that, she was crying, and such a beautiful experience that you were sharing. Shagun says, your story is so inspiring, Jeannine. Natalia says, I really needed this talk.
Okay.
Anita says, this was very inspirational. Thank you. Um, Eileen says, very moving, powerful. Thank you so much. Anuradha says, this is inspiring and absolutely beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Preeti says, so humbled and feeling proud of you, Jeannine. Thank you for sharing your journey with all of us. Shagun says, thank you so much for sharing your journey of recovering from trauma and healing. It is so uplifting. A couple of questions are coming to my mind. If you can speak to them. One, how do you carve alone time with yourself, and what do you do during that time?
Thank you, Shagun. So I'm very fortunate that like I said, I attracted the right partner. So we are both, first, we're supportive of the relationship that we have with ourselves first before the relationship, and that healing is the most important. So finding time as far as the relationship aspect is very easy. I just say I need alone time. How do I do that? I will find a room for myself, or maybe I will go find a place in nature where there's not a lot of people, and I will sit and I will just start breathing and try to connect with what am I feeling, what am I thinking, and sometimes I don't always know. I may finally, sit and start breathing, and then I just need to cry. So I let myself cry. And then once the crying has finished and my heart has had that beautiful release, I've turned on the release valve, then finally I can breathe a little bit better. And then I just start looking at, okay, what needs healing here? Maybe I just need to give myself some love from being busy, which does happen. Maybe I just need some inner reflection time, and maybe I just need to sit there, watch the birds, hear the birds, be in nature. And then I also do my meditation, but I consider my meditation as one of my practices that is in addition to my alone time.
Got it. Okay. And she also asks, how do you transition your clients when they come to talk about a physical issue to talking about past trauma, almost like a therapist?
So this is interesting. It was not my intention that things developed the way that they did. However, the moment I started working on people, because I was already attuned to trauma, I could sense when others had trauma just by their reactions. And so I would gently ask, is there any trauma that I need to know about? And I'm fortunate that most clients, very quickly, we develop a nice trusting relationship. And usually within the first session, people are just pouring out whatever's gone on in their life. And so that's part of the reason also why I kept getting certified in different modalities, because my clients were forcing me to grow. So it just naturally evolves that way. Most people come to my practice usually through the physical, unless they've heard about the other things that I offer through someone else. And then it's through that process where we start talking. I like to say that's the process where I start planting Ayurvedic seeds, because as I'm working on them, the type of body work I do, it's fully clothed, it's very conscious body work. So the client's not usually falling asleep or anything like that. That's where I just start talking about different concepts of Ayurveda, just to start planting those seeds to see if they'll sprout. And every time they come in, I just water it a little more, and before you know it, we're doing an Ayurvedic assessment, and we're doing more of the heart-mind integration. And yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Lovely. Anu has raised her hand. So, Anu, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thanks, Jeannine. I was so moved hearing you. Yeah, a lot of us were moved to tears, and thanks for sharing your story. It's very powerful and so healing. And so I had a question that, if somebody experiences like a deep trauma, like, a hospitalization, and that just happened to my son. So
Yeah.
you said Ama builds up, and are there any specific doshas that you think we should attend to? I know he's experiencing anxiety, so is it Vata? Is it, what should I look for? And yeah, I just loved your talk, so I just had to speak because
Thank
of
you,
that.
Anu.
Thank you.
So to answer your question, Vata is the king dosha. That's the first one to look out for. So, I follow you on Facebook, so I'm familiar with what's going on with your son. And I'm sure by now he's probably gotten used to it. And that's what happens when we have consistent experiences. We get used to it and it becomes the new norm. So obviously you want to look out for Vata. You also want to look out for Pitta, because if he hasn't already had the expression of just needing to express the frustration of the situation, being aware of that, and then naturally you'll recognize Kapha, and actually a lot of these are the Tamas and Rajas energies as well.
Yeah.
Just becoming what's the word I'm looking for, where you just feel like, oh, I just can't anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. Almost lethargic about it, defeated. Yeah. But, in this situation, the more present you are with him, and of course, how your energy is when it's happening. The skill I learned was that when things are really chaotic and traumatic, my brain works unusually well, and all of a sudden I'm the calm one in the room, and I'm like, okay, so here's what we're going to do, and we're going to stay calm, and we're going to breathe, and then all of a sudden I can just see all the steps that need to happen, but I'm holding space. And that's what you need to do for your son. Hold the space, because obviously it's an emergency situation, but the more calm you can be, the better the transition will be. You already know the steps. You've been doing it for many years now, and you just follow the steps. And of course, you be present, make sure he feels loved with, the type of allergies that he has. I would say presence is the most important, because you never know every time you go in the hospital what the end result will be. So making sure that every moment is precious, so that when there are no moments, you don't have regret.
Thank you.
Thanks
a lot.
You're welcome.
Maya has a question. Maya, would you like to actually ask the question? If you can unmute yourself, or I can read it out.
Sure. Right. Maybe I should just go back to it. Oh, yeah, I guess I was curious. Once you started, I know that you had been doing a lot of your own trauma healing prior to having your sessions with Dr. J. But I'm curious if during those sessions, as a part of the Ayurvedic healing model, you did specific trauma healing from kind of an Ayurvedic perspective, or the psychological spiritual counseling in that way, or did he kind of take you through more of the sort of physical, the art, kind of the baby steps of introducing the Ayurvedic way of life kind of as a means of healing?
So in my first session, I completely broke down in tears, and he does this like clockwork with everyone. He pushes the Kleenex box towards you, and then he just waits and he gives you space. Now, this was new for me because I was not familiar with this type of behavior. I'm expecting somebody to, oh, what's wrong, this and that. He's not asking me that question. So he hands me the tissue, and I'm sitting there, and he says, no, go ahead. Just keep letting it out, because I was trying to choke it back. So he encouraged the crying to happen. And toward the end of that first session, he said, life is beautiful. Now, I knew that life was beautiful, but somewhere, because of the amount of depletion that happened in my system, I was starting to lose hope, because my mind was becoming depleted again because of what I took myself through just to lose weight, and the intensity of healing. I also learned that he said, Jeannine, you can't keep going into these types of healings that you're doing with such intensity, because I was like, no, you just keep going. And what I learned was moderation. So he knew the different, types of healing that I was doing at various times. And what he taught me was, even in a meditative practice, depending on what type of meditation one does, there are certain practices that will actually throw you out of balance. Well, I didn't know any of that. So what he taught me was more about balance. Yeah. The body therapies, like I never did Panchakarma until I went on my India trip, and that was a mini Panchakarma back in 2017. I had my first Shirodhara probably in one of the Panchakarma classes, I think in 2015. And that was amazing. I was certainly sold on that. He gave me all of the, the traditional herbs, Manasamitra Vatakam, Brahmi Gritam, which is now Brahmi Pearl, Kalyanaka Gritam, Ashwagandha, things like that. I always was connected spiritually throughout my life, although that was a very confusing thing because I was raised Christian, but obviously what was going on at home didn't quite align with what was being taught in church. So I very quickly decided that I didn't know what I believed, but I could not subscribe to that because of what was going on at home. It was a mixed signal. So I did a lot of, different exploring at different spiritual paths. I would say that I connect closer to more of the Hindu philosophy. But I don't claim any religion except love. And if your religion or your spiritual belief leads you closer to light and to being a better person, that's really all that matters. So did that answer your full question, Maya?
Yeah, definitely. It gives me a picture for how he approached that aspect of your situation, of your wounding, kind of in the whole model, the whole picture of how he was seeing you. He held space for you, which it sounds like.
Yeah, and he holds space for everyone. That's what's just so amazing. So whatever your experience is, he's holding space for you to have, whatever the feelings are. And I really appreciated that.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I've also seen him do that. It's really amazing.
Yeah.
So if you have a little more time, Jeannine, we have a few more questions. I know we're at the end of the hour, but so one question from Eileen is and this was a question I also had, what books have you would you recommend about trauma and healing? Like it could be Ayurveda or, even otherwise.
That's a really good question. I'd first like to say that I was a spiritual window shopper as well as a healing window shopper. So, I would get multiple books, read them, but not like fully embrace, whether it was a spiritual path or whatever. And so that alone will create a lot of confusion in your system. It happens often in the Ayurvedic communities as well, where, maybe we've brought in modern information and it becomes diluted. That's what I appreciate about Kerala, is that everything's, taught from the ancient scriptures. But to answer your question, there are two authors that I highly recommend as far as personal growth. And Byron Katie is one of them. I have not actually read any of her books. I have seen her YouTube, I've gone to her website, and I've worked her process for many years. The other author is Brené Brown. She's all about the art of vulnerability. And when I read that book, it inspired me to be courageous in my healing. From an Ayurvedic perspective, we have ancient textbooks that do teach us about the samprapti of different psychological diseases, which herbs to use. The most recent one, I Actually, let me just grab it because I forgot the name of it. Yeah, that's actually going to be my specialty in the doctor program. And so I picked up this book, Manas, which is the psychiatry of Ayurveda. But it's pretty deep. And I think what you're looking for is how to process. And that can be very unique to you, how you process. So I would say it's actually more important to find the right practitioner, whether they're an Ayurvedic practitioner or not, that can support you in growing beyond where you're at, holding space, and who has experience working with trauma.
Right. Okay, thank you. Jankana has a question. Jankana, would you like to ask the question?
Yes, Shruti. Just give me a second. I'll turn my video on.
Sure, sure.
Hi, Jeannine. Thank you so much. It was really wonderful talk. I must say that I actually live at the other end of the spectrum. Maybe internally strong or not. That's a very personal perspective, but I shy away from sharing my story. So it's so encouraging, so inspiring to just see see someone like you who is so courageous, so strong to come out and share the story. So I really appreciate that. Thank you, really. And so the question I had, I am very much into just very much adhere, I gravitate more towards making it as natural as possible. And I totally resonated with, when you mentioned about breath work and the meditations and the spiritual practices. And that's what I have gravitated more. Of course, I do, the Ayurvedic use of Ayurvedic herbs, but I kind of tend to use them just when it's really needed, and then tend to take a back seat. And so I just wanted to get your perspective on, with stuff that's so much intense with the mind, long term, from a long term perspective, would you recommend or rely more on a long term use, even if it's natural things, like Manasmitram, for example, or more of the other practices?
I would say all of the above. I am quite diligent with taking my Ayurvedic herbs. But that said, depending on what level of education you're in, most herbs should not be taken past 3 months. You should, adjust them and things like that. But because Manas is obviously my weaker tissue, that is always going to be the tissue that ends up becoming vulnerable. So I make sure that my digestive strength is at an optimum to the best of my ability. And that includes taking my digestive herbs, making sure I've done my breathing practice, my alone time, making sure my routine's in order, all of that. And I change it up now. I normally see Dr. J, but in the past 6 months, I've started, basically doing my own assessment. And then I have some colleagues who are here on the call. And sometimes I will run my case by them. They're also in the doctor program. So if you're going to do the herb route, please make sure that you're using a practitioner, obviously, and stay consistent. So when I'm guiding others, the biggest challenge is consistency with herbs, but you have to be consistent, and this does take time. So I encourage the little milestones. Yay, you were consistent for a week when you couldn't be consistent at all. Awesome, let's see if we can go for 2 weeks. Sometimes it's that type of encouragement. But in order to stay healthy, consistency is needed. So only taking them, when needed, it's very unique to you. I can't give a blanket statement, and it wouldn't be professional of me to either, because I don't know what your prakriti, vikriti, what your history is. So, you know, if you are a practitioner yourself, maybe run it by another practitioner just to make sure, and then be consistent. And then if you've been on it for roughly, 3 months, depending on the formulation now, because some formulations you don't want to be on that long, then you would want to adjust that. So does that answer your question?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I was more leaning on not, the physical ones. I understand vitamin D's and those types of things you kind of have to keep going, but my question was more oriented towards things for the mind, the physical health.
Yeah.
But you
So
did answer that. Yes, you did answer that too.
yeah, for a long time I took Kalyanaka Gritham, then it would switch to Brahmi depending on the season. I'm pretty sure I was on Manasamitra Vatakam for probably 4 years. That's actually one that I now take as needed. I don't have to be on it consistently. Okay. But again, it has to be regulated. You take a little break. That's why you need to, a practitioner. Sometimes I'll use ashwagandha. So I do a lot of self-regulation. If I notice something's going on with my dreams that's indicating, okay, I'm processing more trauma, depending on what's happening for me with my thoughts, my actions, how I'm feeling will determine which herb I decide, okay, I'm going to take this for X amount of time until, it becomes more balanced.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
All
Thanks,
right.
You're welcome.
Shruti.
Thank you so much, Jankna. And I think that's the end of the questions. So maybe it's time for us to wrap up for today. Before we do that, I did want to share two important updates, announcements. One is next Friday, we have our community hours, our monthly community hours that organizers at CTA have been hosting since June. So we would love to see you guys. And we will be talking about sleep and the role of sleep in health as a group. So please do join us next Friday. We will be sharing the announcement and links to join soon. And the second actually really fun update I have, and Shagun is also online, is that, we've recently started a book club at CTA. So if you would like to join the book club, let us know, we'll add you. And we just went through a voting process for the books that we want to read. And the first book that we will be reading is, or maybe Shagun, you want to jump in real quick and share with the group the first book that we will be reading. Shagun, are you still on?
I don't see her.
Oh, maybe she dropped off.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can share the first book. It's called The Art and Science of Vedic Counseling by Suhas Shirsagar and David Frawley. So we plan to read this book, and the first book club meeting is going to be in September. We will share the date and time soon. So if you would like to join the book club, you're most welcome. Let us know.
That is a very good book.
Oh, wonderful. You've read it.
Yeah.
Great.
I read that one and Dr. Frawley's Ayurveda and the Mind.
Okay.
So while they're not root texts, those are good books.
Sure. Some of the people are actually asking for names of the authors that you shared.
I'll write them in the chat.
That'll be great, yeah.
Brene Brown is the first one. Oh, wait, hold on. Everyone. Okay, Brene Brown and Byron Katie. And they're not Ayurveda at all, but the concepts that they teach are universal.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. Jeannine, this was wonderful. Thank you so much. Very great.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining today. Wonderful to see you all. Have a great weekend, and see you all hopefully next week at the community hours.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, I will end the call. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.